And now it's time to get started with my veggie loaf that I'm going to serve for Thanksgiving. This is a really interesting dish. I like the complexity of it, so let's get going on that one. Since we don't eat turkey, I thought it was worthwhile coming up with a dish that was filling, kind of felt like fall, and had that sort of Thanksgiving-y sort of flavor to it. So I wanted to do a mushroom sort of casserole. So I got this idea and called some different ideas from around the internet. I started with some mushrooms that I diced up and then took some sourdough bread. Now the sourdough bread has a nice texture to it and has a nice flavor that I wanted to use. I'm only going to use about half the loaf for this. I'm going to use the other half for some other part. I cut the crusts off because I'm going to use the crusts for some sort of part of the filling as well. I'll use them as breadcrumbs. I'll go ahead and puree those, toast them up a little bit, and they'll be nice to use for that. The rest of the loaf, I'm going to go ahead and soak in some milk, so that way it gets a nice texture to it. I'll use, I think I use a little oat milk and a little almond milk here just to kind of give it a little flavor, so that way it stays vegan as well. You could certainly use other milk if you want to, but the idea is just to get them on the plate, go ahead and add some milk to them, and let them soak for about 15 or 20 minutes. So while they're soaking up the milk, I'm going to go ahead and continue getting my dish ready. Now, I'm a big believer in sort of multitasking while you're in the kitchen. So while that's soaking, I'm going to go ahead and heat up some oil in a pan. And while the oil heats up in the pan, I'm going to go ahead and start using my food processor to get some of the other ingredients ready. Now, the first ingredient I'm going to work with is some walnuts. Now, I've toasted these in the oven, so they've got a little bit of a char on them, a little flavor. Some of the oils are released, and it gives it a nice flavor. And I'm going to go ahead and puree these to something that's sort of a rough chop. I just want a little texture there, but I want to be able to distribute it out, and I want to be able to taste the walnut when I'm in there. I don't want it to be a fine powder. So go ahead and get that closed up and start my walnuts going through the process. And as those come together, I've got a little bit of a walnut puree here that's it's got some texture to it. I want to make sure that it doesn't have too much powder, but I want it to have a nice kind of appeal to it, so it's a little bit grainy. And as you can see, as I pulsed it, I came up with something like that. So now I'll go ahead and I'll put together my breadcrumbs, and I've got a few mushrooms that I threw in here too because I figured it was worthwhile. I just toasted up those end pieces of the bread, threw them in the oven, and now I'm going to put them in here just to get them pureed as well. So now I'm ready with my dish that I can continue on and start actually doing some cooking. So I'll get some onions in there and start them cooking. Now I want to get those to be caramelized and slightly brown because that gets a lot of flavor. I think this dish has a lot of depth to it because you get a lot of different flavors working in there, so it's important to build those flavors. So you have the toasted breadcrumbs and the toasted walnuts, and you want the onions to caramelize. They give up some of their sweetness and taste really nice. So I'll go ahead and keep cooking those for a few minutes until they get nice and sort of brownish in color, and then I'll add my mushrooms. And this is where I want my mushrooms to come in a couple of steps. I want about 2 pounds of mushrooms that I'm going to put in here in total because I really want to get some mushroom flavor going out of it. So I'll get those started and really get something going here to get the mushrooms in. And I like to do this in batches because it's a little bit easier to get them sauteed and in there. I've used a number of different mushrooms in here. I have some white button mushrooms, some porcinis, some shiitakes, and some wood mushrooms, some wood ears. And I think that combination of flavors, and I also have a wild mushroom mix that I put in here as well. I forgot about that one. But it's a nice mix of mushrooms that really gives it a lot of different flavors. So they get these different things going to get a really nice mushroomy taste without really overwhelming the dish. So once that's together, I'll go ahead and put in my 3 spices. I've got sage, I've got oregano, and I've got thyme. And I put about a tablespoon of each in there just to start giving it that Thanksgiving fall flavor. I think those are the important flavors to have in here that really bring it together and make me think of Thanksgiving. So I'll go ahead and add those. I'll stir it up continue to cook those until I get to a point where I'm comfortable with how well they're cooked and how it comes together. And you can see the steam coming off, and man, the smell of it just cooking up is really, really nice. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in a couple more ingredients here. I'm going to put a little bit of tomato in it. I think it needs a little tomato just to give it a little flavor. So I've just got some fire roasted tomatoes I'll put in. I'm going to put a dash of mustard. I think the mustard adds a little bit of extra flavor to it, so just get a little dash in there to get it going. And continue to stir it up with those ingredients in there. And really, again, it's just about building some flavors and putting something really neat in here. Now, as far as how this dish continues to come together, there's a couple of other things I want to put in here. And so I'll go ahead and get those ready, and we'll add them in to continue making this happen. So we've got it all together. Now I'm going to add my breadcrumbs. just to get those in there. And again, I had put some mushrooms in here just to get them ground up at the same time. I wanted to make sure they were nice and small. These are the wood-eared mushrooms, and I wanted to make sure they were nice and small, and I didn't want to leave a large chop on those. Where the rest of the mushrooms, I was leaving a fairly large chop. But now that I've got those in there, I can add my oatmeal. I take a little bit of oatmeal and I actually put it in water and cook it slightly, and then I put it in here. It's a nice binding agent and makes the dish come together a little bit more nicely. So that's kind of the base of everything that I've got. So you've got the oats kind of help bind everything together, give it a little texture. And again, it's about the textures and everything that comes together with it. I'm going to go ahead and add my walnuts back in. Those I've been sitting aside for a while. I'll get those in there as well. And you can see how this is kind of coming together. There was a liquidness to the dish, and now it's starting to dry out just a little bit more because of these ingredients I'm putting in. And now I'm going to add a little bit more liquid in because I'm going to take my bread that I've been soaking, go ahead and squeeze out a little bit of the liquid from it, and go ahead and break it up into chunks and get it into my batter as well. Batter, if you want to call it that, my mix. So I'll go ahead and just take these and put them in there, and that starts to add a little bit more to the depth of the dish because you got that sourdough flavor and that little bit of milkiness that gives it a little more liquid that really makes it come together. So I'll get those in there, and I'll go ahead and mix those in as well. And that really starts to bring together this dish as something that's going to kind of bind together and give it a lot more texture and flavor. So we're almost done now. We've got the dish mostly together. I just want to continue to mix it, add in the last few ingredients, and kind of get it ready to go. Now, as you can see in my cast iron skillet, I'm really pretty full in here, so I'm going to go ahead and dump this out into a bowl to continue this. I want to add a little bit more to it. Something I want to make sure I get in there is a little bit of lemon juice. I like to have a little lemon juice in here. It gives a little zing, a little zest, a little something. You could add lemon zest if you prefer, but I think the lemon juice really adds something nice to it because it gives it a little tartness, a little tanginess to go along with it. And then finally, the last ingredient I'm going to add is a couple of eggs because I want to be able to bind it together. And of course, a little salt and pepper never hurts, just to kind of round out the flavor. You always want to make sure you're putting enough in there. But there are the eggs. They're in there too. If you wanted to make this vegan, you could certainly use some other binding substitute instead of eggs. But I'm fine with eggs being in it. I think it adds something nice. So it's a nice combination of things we've got going here. You think about all these flavors and textures you have coming into this. It kind of, when you think about turkey, I always find turkey to be dry, and it kind of has an interesting mouthfeel to me. So I wanted to kind of emulate something where it had a similar sort of mouthfeel, but not be as dry. This mushroom dish kind of fills that bill, and once you put the gravy on top of it, it's a tremendous dish. It really is pretty tasty. So it's something that I really enjoyed making, and I'll definitely be making it again. So I'll go ahead and just mix it up until it comes to a point where it feels like it's all come together as a nice sort of textural component, and it feels like it's all bound together a little bit. And then I'm going to move it into a baking dish. I'm going to use a loaf pan for this because I want it to come out sort of looking like a loaf. So I'll go ahead and just get it in the loaf pan like this, and we'll get it all together. Go ahead and spread it out, make sure it's even. And once it's done, I'm going to get it in the oven at about 400 degrees for about an hour. Basically, because you want it to kind of continue to cook through. You do have the raw eggs in it, so you want to make sure that it cooks through completely. But the texture of it is really nice, and the shape of it is going to be really good because it'll work well. I can just slice off pieces and serve them, much like I would a slice of turkey in a way. I know it's not the same thing, but sort of gives you that sort of visual appearance. And I know it's going to be a little more brown, but that's okay. That's what I want it to look like. So there you go. That is my mushroom loaf that I make for Thanksgiving. It's really pretty good, very tasty, very easy as it comes together, and just takes a little bit of effort. And when it comes out of the oven, you get this beautiful dish that looks something like this that you can just slice hunks off of and eat it. So really good. Hope you enjoy.